Hey there, I'm Joey from EDH Rec, and today I'd like to share with you a fun, silly idea for a Rule Zero commander deck, and perhaps use that as a springboard to talk about Rule Zero itself. So first, for those who don't know, Rule Zero is that bit in the rules about how, if the entire group agrees to it, you can all bend the rules in your game. Some people will use it so that they can all play with banned cards, for example. Some people will use it to ask if they can play with silver-bordered cards in their deck, that sort of thing. If everyone is comfortable with it, strict adherence to the rules of the game does not have to be more important than just doing some fun, silly, memorable stuff with your friends. So what's the deck idea? Well, many of you may be familiar with the way that I track commander tax in my Saga deck, where every time I recast her, she upgrades to a new version of herself. It's just my favorite way to use alternate art versions of a card. It's a very silly thing, but I don't know, I really enjoy it. And inspired by that, I made this post on my socials a little while back, and boy howdy, it really resonated with a lot of people. So I thought it was time that I pitched that idea to all of you too. The idea is simple. Each time you go to cast your commander, rather than dealing with command tax, instead you cast another version of that character, so that each time you play them, they're basically leveling up into their final form. Let the command zone tell the story of the character. So here, for instance, you could have the infamous Urza starting off young, and then the next time you play him, he's growing up and up and up, and eventually he'll turn into his ultimate final version. And there are tons of characters you could do this with. Niv Mizzet can progress from Firemind to Draco Genius, to Perun, to Reborn, to Supreme. Tawnos can start off as an apprentice and then be a toymaker and eventually a solemn survivor. Or you could use the new Lord of the Rings cards to tell the full story of Gandalf, beginning humbly as a friend of the Shire and then eventually turning into Gandalf the Grey, Gandalf the White, and eventually sailing off into the West. Heck, we're getting that new Universes Beyond Doctor Who set soon, right? That property is just ripe for this idea. Every time you recast the Doctor, they're the next available version? Seriously, at that point, recasting the 10th Doctor as just the 10th Doctor would feel like a flavor fail, cause they should always turn into the next one. Careful though, if you pick a character like Jessica, canonically she turns into Phage the Untouchable, so you better be ready for that consequence. Basically, your commander is a reef worm. It starts off as a small little worm, and eventually you're telling the story of the great big Kraken. In fact, as a little proof of concept for this idea, I threw together a deck list for one of the most iconic character progressions in all of Magic. Omnath. Starts as mono green and slowly escalates into a 5-color monstrosity. Now, technically, while many of the Omnaths have a lot in common, not all of them actually synergize together. Mono green Omnath cares about mono green mana, for example, and that's going to be pretty awkward in a 5-color deck. This is a much bigger problem for other characters, though. I mean, heck, I mentioned Gandalf, and those abilities are about as far-flung as possible, since one of the Gandalfs cares about the ring tempting you, and then another one cares about legendary and artifact enter the battlefield effects, and the last one cares about 5-mana spells. Making a deck that threads all of those needles flawlessly sounds like tough stuff, but you could also just build it to focus on the flavor of the character. Use only Lord of the Rings cards in the deck, show characters that he interacts with the most in the story, stuff like that. This Omnath decklist is a whole lot of mana matters and landfall stuff, but I think the main point of this whole exercise really is to flex your storytelling muscles, and I know that I would be most impressed by people who pull out all the stops to make a themed and flavorful deck that evokes the life and times of the character they've chosen. In fact, what the heck, I made another list too, and this one's for Sauron. Start off with the mono black and then slowly escalate up and up and up. I went for pure flavor on this one, only using Tales of Middle-earth cards, and it's very heavily influenced by theme. I'll admit this IP is not my strong suit, but the idea was just really fun to play around with. Even if I don't know the lore of Lord of the Rings all that well, this was really cool. Now, could you technically just play one of the Saurons and use the other ones in the 99 and then just make an actually proficient deck or even just an actually flavorful deck without needing to do this extra added flourish? Yeah, of course. And a lot of people are doing exactly that. But this idea is just, I don't know, so charming to me. And as long as we have all of these various versions of characters throughout their fantasy histories, it just seems like a neat little way to inject some extra spice into a game. Are you ever likely to even get to the final versions of a character? No, I don't think so. I almost never make it past the third version in my system of alternate arts for Saga. But nevertheless, I don't really care because it's just kind of fun. And there are a ton of ways to play around with this idea too. Maybe it's not just about a single character, but a position or a title, such as the story of the Guildmasters for your favorite guild on Ravnica. Maybe you're doing it for a bloodline, so you're telling the story of the Umezawas across time. I know I am personally tempted to try out a deck using the 5 Kodamas. I don't know if they're all technically connected or all parts of the same entity, I'm really not sure, but I just think they'd be dope swapping around on the command zone. Not powerful, not by any means, but just a fun idea. And of course, this particular example begs the question, well, which one would you even cast first? But that's where you can have even more fun with this. Maybe you order them by mana cost to make it simple. Or maybe you do it at random. Shuffle them up before the game begins, put the pile face down, and flip the top one to see which one you're allowed to cast next. Or here's another. Some characters have alternate history versions of themselves, right? So each time you cast, say, Braids, you have to go back and forth between the legal blue and black versions each time you cast her. Sort of like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation. Or here's another one. You can cast whichever version of the character you want to, but once they're removed, they're out for good. So you can't ever cast that version again. So then it's kind of like you're playing with a total number of lives for that character. Feel free to start off with your favorite version, but over time, you might find yourself left with their least useful iteration as the only one remaining in your command zone. And that one may not be as helpful for pushing through to the end game and getting you across the finish line. Any one of these could be a really fun way to approach this idea, and simply coming up with brainstorms for them was so much fun. And honestly, I was gonna let that be the end of the video. I seriously was just gonna say, that's it. I hope you like the idea. Tell me which characters you think would be fun for this kind of thing. I was gonna say like and subscribe, and I was gonna ask about times where you and your group have used Rule Zero to bend the rules to add a little bit more spice and flavor to the game experience for everyone, and what was that experience like? And I was gonna stop there. But I can't. I can't stop there because it turns out there's something else that we have to talk about with Rule Zero. As soon as I mentioned this silly idea, a whole lot of questions popped up in a lot of people's heads, and I wouldn't be surprised if people have already left a lot of comments asking those questions. For instance, with multiple commanders, how do you determine color identity? Well, it's weird, but to me it just makes the most sense for the deck to be the combined color identity of all of the versions of the commander. I know it's a little bit strange if you're casting white spells while you have a blue-red Niv Mizzet in play, but what can you do? Also, why no commander tax? Well, that's just a practical solution on my part. Like, if the idea is to tell the story of the character, then I don't think anyone wants to, nor will be able to, spend 13 mana just to cast Gandalf Westward Voyager, you know? What about, like, does this mean you're able to have multiple of them in play at the same time? Like, if you've cast one and then the next one is face up in the command zone, could you also cast that? No, that's a hard no from me. The idea is that it is supposed to be the same character, so to enforce that, only one of them should be allowed outside of the command zone at any given time. In the version of, like, oh, this is a character's chronology, I think maybe you could sort of have them, for example, all packed into a single card sleeve, and then when it goes back to the command zone, you can actually just take the top one and flip it to the back, and then you've got a new one face up ready to go. That's just one version of events, but that's just sort of thematically how it resonates for me. What about card count? Like, does having 5 versions of a character in your command zone contribute to the 100 card limit of a commander deck? That's tricky, but I mean, personally, I'm tempted to treat it all as a single card slot, because it's not like partners. It wouldn't be like that. The idea is that it is just the same character growing up over time, or however version of it that you're doing. But I don't think that it should eat away, like subtract the number of cards that are actually in your deck. But I don't know, that's just me. Some people will probably disagree with that. How about commander damage? Well, that's tricky again. I could see a whole lot of disagreement about that. I can totally see an argument where if it's like the same character growing up over time, then they would have a memory of their commander damage, but not all of the options that I described earlier were the same character. Some of them were all different characters. Some of these approaches are not necessarily chronological. It's pretty tough. And so just to make things simple, I wouldn't want to push my luck, and I'd be very happy to consider each of those versions of the character to be a different card for the purposes of tracking commander damage. Now already, that's a lot of questions to ask about just a silly theme idea. But they are necessary. A fun idea needs an armature to support it. And that's what rules are. A game can't work without the rules to actually support the entire structure of it. But that's also not where the questions end. Not even close. Because as soon as I propose some of those solutions I just mentioned, that creates even more questions. How many times do people even recast their commanders in the first place? Like, if you've got 5 versions of a character, you're never realistically going to reach their final form. I mean, yeah, let's be honest, it's a pipe dream. It's just supposed to be a little bit fun. Wait, no command tax? Doesn't that feel kind of unfair compared to everybody else? Well, yeah, maybe it could, but so you're saying I'm gonna be able to play a commander as powerful as Niv Mizzet Perun and also get access to all the best spells in every single color? Okay, yeah, I do see how that could be pretty breakable. Wait, you get like 5 cards in your command zone and that doesn't affect your 100 card limit? How is that fair? Okay, well, instead I could make all of them count towards the 100 card limit, so then it would only be like 95 cards in the starting deck. So then you begin the game with fewer cards in your starting deck than everybody else, which makes it easier for you to draw your best cards. How is that all right? Well, yeah, that's why I didn't have it that way in the first place, actually, because I didn't want it to be perceived as like some unfair advantage. But then, I mean, when I proposed that solution, the other person didn't like it, so not sure what I'm supposed to propose then. Some characters time travel, their printings hop around the timeline. How are we supposed to decide what counts as chronological order to them? Shouldn't we just go by the order that they were printed? I mean, whichever one feels most comfortable to you and your playgroup. Well, I guess there could be some disagreement about what the right order would be, wouldn't it? How do you resolve that? What do you mean Jessica becomes Phage? Is that really what happens in the lore? It is, yeah. Definitely not everyone is going to know all of the lore for all of the characters, but yes, Jessica is also Phage, and also technically Corona, who's also a Chroma. That gets complicated. Well, since not everybody knows the nitty-gritty details with the lore, what's to stop people from bending the truth a little bit and making claims that certain characters are in fact related or connected in this story in a way that's actually very difficult to disprove, just so those people can justify having multiple awesome legends in their command zone? I hope that would be part of the Rule Zero pregame discussion. Oh, a pregame discussion. You think that's just gonna go fine and that people won't abuse that? I mean, I made a whole video about my thoughts on that if you want to check it out, but yeah, even Rule Zero says it is not a license for an individual to enforce their vision onto a playgroup. And I noticed you didn't have the Blind Seer in your section earlier when you were using Urza as an example. Don't you know that canonically the Blind Seer is Urza? Who are you to tell people about lore? Honestly, I just thought that it would be distracting to mention it at that part of the video, so I decided I would bring it up later in the video. Well, speaking of the Blind Seer card, I mean, that one's pretty trash, and there's also a version of Mishra that doesn't fit in very well with his other versions too. I mean, do you have to use those if you're making a deck for those characters? I mean, no, I'm not gonna be a stickler about that. Actually, I can't even afford all the versions of the character that I'd want to use. Some of those cards are really expensive. Does that mean I can't do this Rule Zero idea at all with my favorite character? I mean, no, I don't see a reason that you would like need to be beholden to having absolutely all of the expense. Like, if you don't have the $50 Urza and you still want to try out this idea, I don't mind. I'd still love to get in a game with you. Wait, so you're saying people can just skip any version of a character that they want to? That type of editorializing seems very abusable, so that a player could use only the very most powerful versions of a character in their command zone. Yeah, that's true, but it would be just kind of self-defeating to say that everyone must use exactly these cards in exactly a certain way. I notice you didn't propose using proxies instead of expensive versions of cards that people can't afford. Why are you anti-proxy? These are the things that people say to me. Let's go back to the color identity thing. I think I've got a better idea. What if you can build with the combined color identity of all the versions of that character, but during the game you can only create mana of the colors of the current version of your commander? I mean, that sounds way more complicated, and honestly not like a ton of fun either. Oh, so you get to decide what fun is? What? This all sounds complicated. If you really like that character, why don't you just play all the versions of that character in a normal commander deck? It's clear that you have not thought this idea out. Characters come to you are really just I don't really think it really works. I mean, I just thought it was kind of a fun idea. This is why we can't have nice things. This isn't what I set out to write when I sat down to make this video. This is not the video I wanted to make. I just wanted to share a silly idea and hope that the however many thousands of people who are watching it might like it. I mean, I expected that most people would be like, that's cute, and then just move on. But I hoped that it might, I don't know, like, lodge in the brains of some of those few really committed and clever deck builders out there who love to tell a story with their deck and who could take that idea and run with it. But without guidelines, an idea is just a wish. Like, it needs something concrete in order to actually be able to stand upright. But trying to lay down anything concrete just felt like it exposed more flaws and problems and criticisms to the point that it made me want to just toss the whole idea in the trash. And to even mention the words Rule Zero is to invite even more scrutiny, because there are people out there who don't think that pregame discussions can ever be successful, or because there are people out there who will jump to say that if Rule Zero exists to break all the rules, then what's even the point of a rules committee? And that latter group is quite plainly making an argument in such comically bad faith that it demonstrates a level of intellectual disconnect that deserves the scorn and mockery I'm treating it with right now. But the concerns of the former group do deserve some attention, because yeah, when you sit down to play against strangers, who's to say that one of them won't abuse any of the many loopholes that are introduced when they ask if you'll let them bend the rules? So all that leads me to the primary lesson that I think matters the most about Rule Zero commander decks. Finally, the real point of this whole sprawling video. And it's something that I think was stated so eloquently by Dan Sheehan of the Commander Sphere podcast. Definitely go give that a listen if you haven't already. To paraphrase him just a bit, if you're going to play a Rule Zero commander deck, it should probably kind of suck, or at least be reined in. Like, if you're asking people to let you cheat and then you sweep the floor with them, no one's impressed, dude. Like, you handily won because you were doing something against the rules that no one else could do? Cool? Bending the rules is the kind of thing I'd really only want to see when it's done in the service of like theme or flavor or in service of communal joy. It should be done to create something cool for everyone. Otherwise, it's just kind of dumb. Like, I'm obviously not saying that you should never win any games if you're playing a Rule Zero commander deck, but I am saying that if the primary effect of you playing a Rule Zero commander deck is that you win better or whatever, that's kind of suspect. And I would love to think that the only types of people who would even be interested in this whole level up commander idea in the first place are the types of folks who would use it to explore theme and flavor and stuff like that. But we all know there would be people who build it to abuse it and to do the most broken thing. No matter what the restriction is, players love to optimize a system. I mean, heck, just take mulligans as an example. There are so many pods I've played against, including against complete strangers, where the vibe is just like everyone like, don't mull down to 4. Everyone's just like, get a good 7. If everyone's able to have at the very least a good start to the game, then that probably means we're going to have a better game where everyone's able to participate and we're all going to create a joyful and more memorable experience for everyone involved. And that is the focus. And I've totally been at so many tables where everyone's agreed to do that. And I've also been at some tables where there are people who abuse that type of agreement and who use punishmentless free mulligans to sculpt their opening hand and find their best cards and then just sweep the floor with everybody. And it sucks. I mean, personally, I would like to hope that if a person really wants to play some super broken stuff, then they're not going to bother with this whole Rule Zero idea at all. Like, why bother starting with mono green Omnath if what you're trying to do is like a bunch of 5-color combo nonsense, right? But that's just how it works. When someone proposes a silly thing, no matter how much they try to communicate the silliness of that thing, some folks are going to take that idea and find a way to abuse it. They do it already in normal Commander. Like, oh yeah, this is my all angels deck. I'd say it's about a 6 or a 7. And then it turns out here's a turn 4 Thassa's Oracle combo. GG, everybody. And that's why, to repeat myself a little bit from a previous video, I can't lay down any specific, this is definitely what you should exactly do kind of deal. Because that would be asinine. Like, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to social problems. Just like there's no one-size-fits-all take on which of these Rule Zero ideas would work the best. Some characters might feel better with the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde approach. Some might feel better if you order them by mana cost. Some might feel better if you're doing a chronological timeline. Some are going to be a completely mixed bag. Some players will feel weird about the effects that this Rule Zero idea has on the deck size or on commander damage, and some aren't going to give a crap about the minute rule details, and they're just like, whatever, just like, let's go in game. Some players are going to be open to neat Rule Zero suggestions, and some players are going to be total skis-balls who use Rule Zero to take advantage of your trust. I can't tell you what to do about all that, and I'm not going to try. It would be ridiculous if I were to try. Like, I don't know your experiences. I can't prescribe you a definite solution to this. Like, that's not how this works. The only thing I can do is remind you that it's a useful skill to know when you're being disrespected, and that it can be helpful to know in advance what you will and won't put up with. If someone comes to me wanting to play a Rule Zero deck, all I can do is use my best judgment about what their intentions actually are. Like, are they trying to share something fun with the group, or are they taking advantage of people's trust? I'll have to decide on a case-by-case basis. And all of this has been a truly fascinating lesson to me. Just trying to communicate a silly idea turns out to have had so many strings attached to it. And that's not what I wanted to focus on. Like, when I build one of these level up deck ideas, and make no mistake, I am going to build one of these Rule Zero deck ideas, all I want to do is revel in the silliness of it all. But I do need to be aware of how much support a silly idea needs to fit sensically within the existing framework of the game. And as much as I don't want to get bogged down by minute details, it would be disrespectful to other people if I didn't think about reasonable concerns in advance. And that's why everyone I know who builds Rule Zero decks often have like replacement cards that they can swap in if that silly vibe isn't what the table is going for, or they've got another deck that they can grab and play instead, that kind of thing. But going one more step past that, it's also been a lesson in, for lack of a better word, resiliency. I mean, all those flaws that I listed earlier, y'all, I really did come so close to throwing this entire idea in the trash, because I knew that this silly idea had so many problems that I could not solve, that if I tried to propose any solutions, it would just get torn to pieces, that it just felt like it was this abstract thing that is like cool in concept, but once you actually try to do any execution of it, it's just like, oh no, this just completely falls apart. You look at it and the illusion pops. That's why it took me so long to write this video, because I felt like the cool spark of the idea was just getting smothered and extinguished by all of these technicalities and these criticisms. And I thought that it just had so many self-evidently dumb problems to it that if I was to publish this, I would just end up looking so stupid. But it isn't stupid. It isn't stupid at all. It's heckin' cool. If you come to me with a Doctor Who deck and every time you cast the Doctor, it's a new version of the Doctor, I'ma be hype. That sounds awesome. I've just decided it just is awesome. I am the person who gets to decide what I think is awesome. Or to put it another way, this has been a very useful experience for me to remember not to bow to doubts that would stifle my desire to create. Even if the majority of people who see this are like, that's kind of dumb, Joe. I don't care. My joy is unbreakable. So, not the video I was expecting to make, probably not the video that you were expecting to watch either, but I think that these are important things to hold on to. The point of the game is the fun. The point of this silly level up deck idea is the fun. If you build a Rule Zero deck, I'd highly recommend that it not be optimized to a T, and it instead should focus upon creating an interesting experience for everybody. And if you've got what you think is a cool idea, make sure you're ready to do a little bit of work to iron things out and make sure that it's good for everybody. But also, if it doesn't feel like things are lining up, don't get too in your head about that either. So that's that, and now I'll finally say it. I hope you like and subscribe. I hope you tell me about any Rule Zero decks that you've built down in the comments below, and I'd love to hear about which characters you think work best for this level up deck idea. But until next time, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.